everyone, and welcome. I'm James Milan, and this is your Arlington Dollar. We are visiting, not for the first time, with Allan Tosti, who is the longtime chairman of the Finance Committee here in town, and who is going to give us, once again, a primer on the entire budget process, the Finance Committee's role in that process, and other questions to be addressed over the course of the next little while. First of all, you're a busy man, we know, especially right around now, so we appreciate your being here. Thanks very much.
No, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
This interview is taking place at the beginning of February, which is always a particular point in the cycle where the Finance Committee really starts to ramp up. But I'd like to start by asking you just to take us back some months to the beginning of this current budget process and just walk us through a little bit what the various steps are just to get to this point here.
Sure, be happy to. Usually the process, it's almost like a 12-month process these days, but formally it starts in early September. Two things: the manager presents budget, sends out budget request forms to the department heads.
That's the town manager.
Yep, and the superintendent of schools does the same thing with her people. And so the department heads are preparing their budgets and submitting them to the manager or to the school superintendent. The capital, meanwhile, in September, the capital budget committee cranks up, and they're having monthly meetings on the capital budget items. So through the entire fall, there's lots of budget activity behind the scenes as the manager and the superintendent and the capital budget committee gather all the requests to put them into a comprehensive document. At the same time, the long-term planning committee, which consists of a variety of officials, including the manager and deputy, the superintendent and her budget officer, the Finance Committee, Capital Budget Committee, Selectmen, School Committee, they meet and start looking at the revenues that the town has available to them. And all these things are happening and coming together in December, usually January. We find out all the revenues that are available. That backs up into the process that we use. So the school superintendent and school committee know how much they have to deal with. The manager and selectmen know how much they have to deal with. All the budgets are due to the town manager the first week of January. The manager puts it all together and presents a balanced budget to the Finance Committee in the week of January 15th. So the Finance Committee picks up all their budgets and starts their analysis. So the executive part of town government, focusing on the manager, but also includes the selectmen, the school committee, the superintendent, etc. The manager has pulled all that together and presents a balanced budget to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee is part of the legislative branch of town government. The Finance Committee is like the House Ways and Means Committee of the state government. Their job is to review all the budgets, review the revenues, and present a balanced, responsible budget to our legislative branch, the town meeting. Mm-hmm. So in February, starting in January 15th, but then especially in February and March, the Finance Committee is meeting Mondays and Wednesday nights. They're hearing warrant articles. They're hearing presentations on the budget from individual members of the Finance Committee who have met with department heads. Towards the end of March, or in March, they will all hear presentations from the school committee, the capital budget committee, Minuteman Regional Vocational Tech, and from the Community Preservation Act Committee. At the end of March, we're pulling together the whole budget, voting the final things, and then in early April, we're pulling together the Finance Committee report. In April, we hear what the House Ways and Means Committee at the state level presents as their final recommendation to the House, and we use those final local aid numbers to balance it off, cross the T's, dot the I's, and gets ready to present the budget to town meeting. We try to send it out a week ahead of time. Quite often we're not able to do that. Mm-hmm. So it's on the seats of town meeting when they come in for the first night of town meeting. Town meeting starts off, and there's the warrant, which is prepared by the Board of Selectmen, has a whole process to it. So the early part of the warrant is all of the zoning articles. The middle part of the warrant is all the selectmen sort of miscellaneous bylaw changes, dogs, liquor license, whatever. And then the third part is all the finance articles. So town meeting usually doesn't get to that to the second week of town meeting, which means they've got a whole week to look at the finance committee. The finance committee report will also be available electronically. We send that out as soon as it's ready, and it's also posted on the town meeting, on the town website. So that's sort of in a nutshell, the whole process. And then town meeting deals with the budgets and the financial articles before them, votes that, town meeting dissolves, the town clerk certifies the budget to the controller, and when that process is done on July 1, the town is ready to start implementing the budget and spending on the services of the town.
And you get whatever off-season you get at that point, I assume,
Yeah,
before
usually,
things ramp up again in September.
The Finance Committee meets in the middle of June to do transfers, final reserve fund transfers, and transfers between departments the manager recommends, and that's the budget. And we get a few months off, well, the rest of the committee. I will, myself, together with my vice chairman, will start meeting with the Long Range Planning Committee in October.
Okay, I had mentioned at the outset when I first introduced you that you are, as I said, the longtime chairman of the Finance Committee, but why don't you tell our audience what kind of time we're talking about in terms of your commitment to this process and this responsibility?
Yeah, it's the chairman of the Finance Committee has often been a long-term role. My predecessor, Bob O'Neill, was chairman of the committee through the 70s and 80s into the early 90s. I've been chairman of the committee through the rest of the 90s, 2000s. So I've been chair for about 25 years. I've been very thankful the Finance Committee has had confidence in me, and I find the role very rewarding and sometimes frustrating, but generally very rewarding, and I'm honored to serve in that role.
Yeah, it's a really significant tenure, and just as an aside, want to remind our audience that the work that you're doing with the Finance Committee, as with the other members who we'll soon talk about, is all voluntary. And again, as we do in another public affairs series we have on ACMi, $1 Million Gift, we try and recognize and shine some small spotlight, at least, on the many people in town like yourself who are spending large amounts of time and energy in order to make things happen for the rest of us. So yeah. Again, just a note of appreciation for that.
A lot of people put a tremendous amount of work into making the town government work. It's actually one of the big advantages of a town form of government. In a city form of government, with a manager or, with a mayor or a city manager and a smaller city council board of aldermen, there's simply not as much, as many volunteer roles, even though there are some. There's not as many opportunities to impact it. Here you have a volunteer board, basically Board of Selectmen, school committee, town meeting of 252 volunteer representatives is a tremendous way to get involved in town government. And then you have so many other groups, whether it's the Conservation Commission, the Community Preservation Act, and you look at the back of the town report and there's a committee, each having their role, each having a very important impact. Permanent Town Building Committee is a major amount of time and major impact on all of the construction projects that are going on now. The Capital Budget Committee, led by Charlie Foskett, is so important to the town. There are lots of opportunities to get involved.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more
Sure.
in just a short while. You had mentioned, as you were going through on your express tour of the budget year and the highlights therein, You had mentioned that the town manager has presented the budget to the finance committee over about 2-3 weeks ago or so now, and that brings in together all the numbers from the different departments, and you got the school department as well, and now it's your guys' time to really dig in and do the work that you do. I'd like to talk about that as well. But before that, let me ask you, the town manager's budget that has been passed on to you at this time, is that, you were mentioning earlier that the finance committee's, the ultimate finance committee report will be available for people to see online. Is the town manager's budget that you guys are looking at right now, is that also available online?
I am not sure. The town manager's performance budget is available online. I'm not sure if it's available now, but it will be. A lot of the budgets that the Finance Committee looks at have detailed items on personnel and expenses that I'm not sure are available online, but there is a tremendous amount of information online. All the Finance Committee reports going back, all the town manager budgets going back. The town manager budgets had a great deal of comparative information that is available about other towns and how we compare on many different variables. The town manager sends an annual performance budget not performance budget, but an annual public information out once a year, 4-pager with the Arlington Advocate that goes to all the taxpayers in the town. There is also the virtual visual budget on the town meeting website, where you can go into that and literally look at all kinds of different elements, the revenue breakdowns of the town, the expense breakdowns of the town. You can compare any number of ways, and that's new, or fairly new in the last several years. The town website is a treasure trove of information.
Yeah, basically it is the portal that people can go to in order to find all the material that you were just talking about, right?
And if you're really bored, the Finance Committee is a public meeting. You can go on the cable TV and watch the Finance Committee. Every Monday, it's shown many times during the week, and all the information, everything we do is out there. Along with the selectmen and of course in the school committee meetings and probably several others that I'm not aware of, but everything is very, very public and very open.
And I noticed that you said, in a self-deprecating way, if you're really bored, you can do this, but also obviously if you're really curious, if you're really engaged, if you're really interested in a particular aspect of the town's budget or the town's expenditures, et cetera, all of that information really is accessible to everybody in town.
Yes.
Always important to keep hitting on that point for our audience. I think.
We welcome visitors. Our meetings are held on the second story of the police station in the O'Neill room, and we don't have a huge number of seats, but people are welcome to come and listen.
So let's talk now about in more detail about the work that you do on the Finance Committee. What, first of all, is the composition of the committee and how does that come about?
The Finance Committee has one member from each precinct. There are 21 precincts in the town, therefore there are 21 members on the Finance Committee. It is, a lot of people wonder how you could make a committee like that work. It works together very well. People work together. They have the best interest of the entire town at heart and work in that. We try not to have an agenda. We're not there for any one service. We're looking at all the town services are important, whether it's the large budgets like police, fire, public works, and of course the schools, or whether it's some of the small budgets like the Council on Aging or youth services or public health in the town. That they all have a role, they all have a constituency, and they are all important.
And you were, I know that we've already made clear that your own predecessor and then you yourself have occupied that position for quite a long time. And again, I think that that's to the good. I would assume that there's a certain amount of fluctuation. There has to be, as people, come and go and move into different parts of their lives, et cetera. How do new members come on to the town, to the Finance Committee, and how much financial background, what is the kind of resume that you're looking for, or is there none in particular? It's more just a question of somebody being willing to devote their time to this work. How does that happen?
I think the key is that you're willing to devote the time to learn and do the work. If you have some kind of accounting background or some kind of government background, that's great. But it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to be able to do commit yourself to being there every Monday and Wednesday, plus your own research to do the work. The Finance Committee has a 3-person appointing authority. It consists of the town moderator, the chairman of the Board of Trust Fund Commissioners, which is a selectman appointee, and the chairman of the Finance Committee. And that process usually takes place in the fall. We advertise in the Arlington Advocate. We post it online. We put it on websites, Bob Sprague's website, and we try to advertise it as much as we can. And then in December, the 3-person board meets, reviews the applicants, makes its decision, and then we start again in January. Try to have a full board. We have a full board now. And so that's the process of appointing. And again, we're looking for people who are there and are interested and are willing to do the work.
Are there generally, is the rhythm of that process such that there are usually 1 or 2 new people coming onto the board each year?
Yes, usually we have 2 new people. We have long-standing people who have been on. We lost 2 people in the last 2 years. Mary Ronan and Ken Simmons, who had been on the board since the 1970s, dedicated long-term members, and it was a great loss for us, of course, as well as their families and stuff. We also have several new people. So yes, there's usually 1 or 2 new people. And that's the benefit from having a fairly large committee. We can integrate new people into their roles, and they can have a chance to learn.
So you had mentioned earlier that obviously people need, first and foremost, to be able to commit the time and give forth the effort. And those are the Monday, Wednesday meetings that you were talking about. But you also said, and do also on their own time, their research. I know that there are other responsibilities that each of the Finance Committee members has in addition to attending those meetings.
The committee's broken up by budgets. People look at individual budgets, let's say police, and 2 people meet on police, fire, building, a few other smaller budgets. They meet with the department heads, they analyze it, they ask questions, and they come back before the Finance Committee, present the budget, their recommendations. Finance Committee discusses it. If we're satisfied with the recommendation, we vote it. If there's more questions, they'll go. We don't vote it. We table it. They go back, ask the questions, and come back before the committee. The quality of the town managers that we have had over the last many years, the town of Arlington has been blessed with very effective, hardworking, talented managers. They make our job much easier. They've done their job, selectmen have done their job, and it's much easier to review the budgets when the budgets have been thoroughly vetted already.
Right. So it does sound then that when you say they make your job easier, what I hear that to mean is that, as you guys are going through your vetting of the numbers that have come to you, and then follow-up discussions with the department heads that have submitted those numbers, et cetera, There are in general, and again, I'm not speaking about 100% of the time, of course, but in general, I assume you're mostly saying, yeah, these things add up, this makes sense.
That's correct.
It's not a rubber stamp by any means, because you're doing a lot of work to make sure that that you understand and that that you agree that it makes sense to the budget as presented. But on the whole, there aren't dramatic or substantial changes that you guys are going to be making or insisting upon.
Yeah, it's not like a small budget or a budget in a small town where they don't have a town administrator. The finance committee is getting the budgets directly from the department heads, and they've got to do a tremendous amount of cutting and slashing and putting it together to make it work into revenue. That job has already been done for us. So our job is to make sure they've been vetted, to make sure the questions, to get the answers. We also look at all the warrant articles that are recommended by either the manager, selectmen, school committee, or 10 register voter articles. Mm-hmm. So we get those in, and they've often asked for money. And we've got to decide, is this in effect more important than something else we're already doing? And make recommendations. One thing that we did last year was we got recommendations on all kinds of different art-related issues. And it's very difficult for a committee of laymen to decide that piece of art is more important than that piece of art. So what we decided to do was the Arts Council Commission, which was created by bylaws many years ago. They should be making this. So we gave one set of money to them, and then they decide on all the different arts groups, which is the most important within that budget. And that seems to have worked out reasonably well. Sometimes we'll have more of an impact on separate warrant articles than we do. One thing that the Finance Committee has been dedicated to over the last 15 years is increasing the snow and ice budget. For years, it stayed at $370 and $359 or something, $370,359. It was that way for 20 years. And then basically the deficit in the snow and ice budget got larger and larger and larger. And so we started adding to that budget. Every time we had 25,000 went in snow and ice, and the managers got on board in that. We've increased the snow and ice budget up to around, I think it's close to $900,000 now. And we've also increased the town reserve fund substantially now, so that we no longer set aside money to account for a deficit in snow and ice. We have money set aside that will cover anything but a disaster. Mm-hmm. And so we no longer roll snow and ice deficits into the next year that have to be accounted for in the budgets. And that's one thing the Finance Committee started, the manager got on board, and we do that now.
Yeah, it's another example, I think, of the, really what looks like very prudent fiscal management on the part of the town officials across the board who are responsible for spending our money.
We like to think that Arlington is sort of on the cutting edge. Arlington doesn't have a lot of money because obviously we don't have a Burlington Mall, we don't have a Natick collection, we don't have a huge amount of industrial commercial. In fact, we have very little.
Very little.
We've only got about 6 or 8% of our tax base. It's a residential community, so we don't have a lot of new growth revenues. But what we try to do is make up for it by doing the functions of town government well. We have an excellent capital budget with a capital budget committee and the manager working together. So every year we have a capital budget. The finance committee reviews its presentation, the town meeting reviews it, but it works so well that there's very rarely changes to it. We've done that since 1986. We have a long-term revenue and expenditure plan that has limits built in that started way back in 2005, and that is sort of the heart of our financial plan. And that has working well with that. We have not had an override since 2011. We will be having one in the next couple of years, but we've been able to work that well out, and everybody has worked together. I think that's one of the real blessings in Arlington, that town officials work together very well. The selectmen, the school committee, the superintendent, the manager, the finance committee, this capital budget committee, all work for one town.
It works well. You alluded just now to, you anticipated my next question. In fact, I'm sure you do that not infrequently. But anyway, It has to do with the fact that you mentioned the override that last took place in 2011, and the fact that we are looking at another one coming up. Given what we were just saying about how well managed the town is in a fiscal sense, and how well people work together to ensure that, explain why it is that we are nonetheless looking at an override because of a structural deficit. And then we'll get on to the other large piece of business that lies in front of us, the school. But we'll start with the override that you were just talking about. We can
With the
anticipate.
with the long-term plan that we started in '05, created the basis of our long-term planning. And we, in 2005, we went out for an override and pledged to the people that we would not seek another override for 5 years. We bested that a little bit. We went 6 years before we needed another override. And at that point, in 2013, we needed another override. We pledged that we wouldn't do an override for 3 years, and the voters backed that. And we haven't had another override now since then. There was a major policy change at the state level with the legislature, and Governor Patrick passed in 2014 or 15 to allow the town to join the GIC. And we were one of the first ones into the Group Insurance Commission, which is a state commission that runs health insurance for state employees and locals who join. We were one of the first ones to get into that, and that has saved us a great deal of money. So the long-term plan, the override, the health insurance changes that we've made have allowed us to get by for about 7 or 8 years now without an override. But it will be coming. Mm-hmm. We will need an override sometime in the next 2 to 3 years, substantially to support the budgets. One of the big areas of expenditure that are driving that is the school enrollment. The school enrollment started slowly several years ago. In the last 3 or 4 years, has just
exploded.
We're getting 200 or 200 new students a year, and that has forced us to add an addition to the Thompson School, which just opened in September. That's forcing us to add an addition to the Thompson School, which will be starting after the special town meeting sometime in the next month or two.
I'm sorry, you said Thompson School twice, but did you mean
Hardy
the
School,
thing to come is the Hardy School, right?
Thompson School, that addition of 6 classrooms opened several months ago. The Hardy School needs 6 more classrooms. Construction will start probably this spring. And then the Gibbs. The Audison population just kept expanding and expanding. Mm-hmm. We could not, and the decision was made to reopen the Gibbs School, which, as you know, was closed back in the late 80s, like 86, 88, something like that. And we needed it. And so we are able to expand and our middle school students into the Gibbs and that. And of course, the next big project will be the high school. So, and of course, the school has had to expand its budget to accommodate that. The long-term planning committee has put together elements in our plan to expand for enrollment, but that has been driving the budget far in excess of what we would have anticipated 5 years ago.
Yeah, so there is, as you said, some of the changes that have been made in Arlington, again in a fiscal sense over the last, let's say, 10 or 15 years, is the establishment, among other things, of the long-range planning process, which looks out 5 years all the time, does its best to anticipate natural growth in numbers of different sorts, et cetera, and also, again, to anticipate perhaps when the next override might be necessary, and et cetera, giving everybody and everything in terms of the long-range planning forecast is also available for Arlington citizens to access through the website, as you said.
if you go on the town website, you go to town meeting, you go to each town meeting, we'll list it, and then you go to the reports, Selectmen's Report, Redevelopment Board Report, and Finance Committee Report. If you go to any Finance Committee report, the last page will usually be, or near the end, the long-term plan. And I spend a certain period of time at the beginning of each town meeting, going through the long-term plan, reviewing its assumptions, how it's come together, and we've been doing that for probably 10 years. So the long-term plan is out there. It's unfortunately in small print, but you can see what it is.
Two things are happening at once in my own mind, for instance. One is I have complete confidence in our money managers,
Yep.
let us say. Second thing is, though, comes very clear to me from these conversations is that doesn't matter. At some point, you're going to need an override. At some point, expenses are going to outstrip revenues in this town.
That's correct.
Why is that? Why does that happen?
Well, if you look at our revenue package, the largest part, of course, is property taxes. Property taxes are restrained by Proposition 2.5 to growing to basically 2.5% a year. When your enrollment is going up far in excess of 2.5% a year, and health insurance is usually going double that, pension costs are going double that. Large percentages of your budget are growing at a much more rapid rate than that 2.5%. We get a little bit of additional money from new growth. Somebody puts a new house up, somebody puts a new store block up, that gives us some more money, but really not all that much. Mm-hmm. If you go to the city of Waltham, where all of 128 or 95 between Route 2 and the Mass Pike on both sides is the city of Waltham, and you drive down there and new hotels, new construction is going up, they have a tremendous amount of new growth in revenues. Mm-hmm. Not an issue to them. And other towns, or city of Boston, mm-hmm. Cambridge, they have tremendous, we just don't have that. Mm-hmm. So our property taxes are not growing to the degree that our expenses are growing up. State aid, I think the state, does as well as they can. They've got tremendous impacts from health insurance. In their case, their employee health insurance, but also Medicaid costs are also going up at a tremendous rate. So the state has its own issues, mm-hmm. And their revenues to a certain degree are restricted, if not legally, at least politically. And that state aid has not grown to keep up, especially with enrollment increases. So our revenue package, the rest of it is we get about $10 million in miscellaneous revenues, motor vehicle excise, things like that. Mm-hmm. They have not grown. So basically our revenue package has not been able to keep up with our expenses.
Yeah. And
we're not increasing. We're not adding policemen, we're not adding firemen, we're not adding public works people, library, human services. Those are basically status quo budgets. They grow with cost of living increases. And the schools are basically enrollment increases. So we're not adding new mm-hmm. programs and new things. We're just keeping the status quo and cutting when we have to, but costs are going up.
Yeah, and the fact that we are aware from talking to the town manager, the energy manager at different times, planning department, et cetera, that there are places in which we are now being able to save a certain amount of money, particularly around energy efficiency moves in the town. All of that, again, is great that it's happening, but it just doesn't it doesn't make that much of a dent in the overall budget, I assume.
That's right. We've done all these things. If you look at our streetlight budget, for example, today versus it was in 1990, it's 25% of what it was then. But you've already got all these savings that you've generated. You can't keep doing it again and again.
So just before we wrap up, I wanted to ask whether you can foresee from the from your vantage point with the Finance Committee what what time frame we're talking about for these two big items. Number one, the override that you've already discussed in some detail, and secondly, the debt exclusion that is going to be required to cover the cost of a new high school. Should people be aware and ready for both of those to be coming within the next 2-3 years?
Yes. I don't anticipate any debt exclusions or overrides this year. It could very well be that you would see it in 2019. The high school has a certain schedule they have to follow with the Mass School Building Authority. The first one that they're doing now in public hearings, and if you're interested, you should go to those public hearings. The notices should be on the town website, especially on the school committee website. There's just defined, we need so many square feet for this and so many square feet for that. And that process should be ending and be submitted to the state next August. Then,
you're talking about August 2018?
Of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, once that's sort of finalized, then the architects have to get busy with the school building committee and decide, okay, what is this building going to look like? Are we going to build a brand new building, which is my preference personally, or are we going to try to renovate this mishmash we have for a high school on that? So that all has to take place, and of course that will have public input. So, and you have to decide that before the architects can come up with a number. Mm-hmm. And until you have a number, you really can't put a debt exclusion on the ballot.
Okay, so that's it's just going to be a while for the process itself to unwind enough to come up with that.
I would say that's not going to happen, or at least a debt exclusion wouldn't happen before June of 19.
Good, and I can't resist asking you, since you were bold enough to let us know, why is your preference, because I'm sure you've thought about it quite a lot, would your preference be for a new building for the high school?
All you have to do is take a tour of the current high school. It's got 6 different buildings, all connected at different levels, one elevator. The heating system is a nightmare. The security of the high school is a nightmare. I think it's time for the town to create a 21st century building that meets all of the needs for the next 100 years. My opinion, solely, not the Finance Committee.
Fair enough.
The current building is a mishmash. The project that was done in the late 70s, we were sort of forced to do, created even more of a mishmash. I think we should put a brand new building on Mass Ave, 4 or 5 stories up, get that finished, and then tear down other parts, maybe even a parking garage or something like that. That would be, and then if you're creating a brand new building that is distinct from all the other buildings, you're not moving these poor kids from one place to the other, or trying to bus them out of town to go to high school.
So when you say creating a brand new building, that would mean leaving the current population in the current school.
That's correct.
For as long as it takes to get that building ready to open.
That's correct. I think it would have a lot of advantages and make life much easier for the kids, mm-hmm. For the building committee. But again, just my preference.
Right, and again, we appreciate your sharing your opinion with us, because it is an informed one. Want to make it crystal clear to everybody out there that you do not speak for the Finance Committee. This is your opinion alone. Yep. But nonetheless, it is it's worth getting another voice out there into this public discussion, I think. Because these are exactly the issues that we will be wrestling with as a community. Yes. Around this high school rebuild. All right, we really do appreciate, we've gone over time as we often do on your Arlington Dollar, and especially in talking to somebody who knows as much about how things work in town as you do. We do appreciate you taking the time, though, And we will undoubtedly be back at your door again to ask for either further information about the budget process generally, or maybe just to find out whether the school building project goes according to your vision or not, and see how that ends up.
I'm available anytime except January, and I'm happy to be here. And we're open for questions. Town officials are open for questions. Please don't hesitate to call them.
Okay. This conversation has been with Allan Tosti, the chairman of the Finance Committee here in town, who is going to be leaving here and getting right back to work, I'm sure, because it's a very busy month for him and the rest of the members of the committee. Don't forget, just as Al was saying, you can access all the information that we've been talking about here today through the town's website or any number of other platforms, and we welcome you to do so. We invite you to do so and hope you will. This has been your Arlington Dollar. I'm James Milan. Thanks for joining us.